I worked double shifts at a hospital in the United States, gave up everything, sent money to my family in India every single month for 4 years without missing once, until the day I found out what was actually happening to that money. My mother called me a traitor. My brother used my dead father's name to hurt me, and I realized, too late, that I wasn't the sister of the family. I was the bank. And what happened when I closed that account will leave you speechless. I was born in a small town in the state of Gujarat, India, where everyone knows each other and where women's lives follow a very predictable script: school, marriage, children, silence. My family wasn't rich, but we weren't starving either. We were the kind of family that lives in the middle. Never too much, never too little. My father worked in a textile factory. My mother took care of the house and 4 children. I was the second oldest, which in practice meant I was helping raise the younger ones before I even understood what responsibility was. From a young age, I was that girl who couldn't stay still, not in the sense of being troublesome, but in the sense that I always wanted more. More studying, more understanding, more distance. While my friends dreamed of the perfect husband, I dreamed of a career. I did nursing, worked during the day, studied at night, saved money with a discipline that sometimes scared me, until a friend already living in the United States told me about a visa program for healthcare professionals. It took almost 2 years. When the visa was approved, I cried alone in my parents' bathroom for nearly an hour. My mother thought I was sad to leave. I was crying from relief. I arrived in New Jersey 4 years ago. The first months were the hardest of my adult life. Shared house, double shifts, bad food, constant homesickness. But things got better. I got a steady job at a hospital, a salary that compared to what I earned in India felt absurd. And it was at that moment that I started sending money home. I have to be honest about what motivated me. It wasn't just love, although love was there, real and present. It was also guilt, that specific guilt of the one who left, who got what the others didn't. My mother never asked directly. She didn't need to. She just mentioned that my father's medication was expensive that month, or that my youngest brother wanted to take a course, but money was tight, and I already felt the weight, already calculating how much I could send without compromising my own budget too much. In the beginning, it was small amounts, $100 here, $150 there. But as my situation stabilized, the transfers became more frequent, more regular. And with regularity came something I didn't expect: entitlement. 1 month, I sent less than usual. My mother asked if everything was okay, but the tone had something beyond concern for my health. 1 month, I sent nothing because of an unexpected expense, and my older brother texted, asking if I had forgotten. Forgotten. As if sending money was an obligation I had taken on without signing any contract. I should have set limits then, but I didn't. Because every time I tried to suggest I couldn't send every month, I felt that guilt rising again. And it was easier to keep sending than to deal with the discomfort of no. That was my first mistake, not my last. The moment everything cracked open was a video call on a Tuesday night. I had just gotten home from a 12-hour shift, feet aching, hair still tied up from work, reheated rice in my hand because I had no energy to cook anything real. I opened the app to talk to my mother, and when the call connected, it wasn't her on the screen. It was my older brother Rohan, with an expression I had never seen on him before. Tense, closed. The kind of expression someone wears when they're in the middle of a fight and pretending they're not. "Priya, we need to talk about the money," he said, before even asking how I was. Those 6 words changed everything. I had sent $300 the month before for a stove my mother said had broken. The problem, according to Rohan, was that my mother hadn't bought the stove. She had given part of the money to my sister Divya, who was behind on rent. Rohan had found out and felt betrayed because he had asked my mother for help weeks earlier and she had said she couldn't. So she had money and chose to give it to Divya? I stayed silent for a moment. "Rohan, the money was for the stove. The stove is still broken, Priya." In the weeks that followed, I began to understand the full dimension of what was happening. The money I sent had no clear destination. It went to my mother's account, and she distributed it however she saw fit, which never matched what I imagined, and even less what my siblings expected. Each one had a different version of how that money should be used, and none of them had been transparent with me about any of it. I had become, in their eyes, not a sister, not a daughter, a resource. There was a family call. The the kind we usually do for birthdays and holidays. But that one wasn't a celebration. It was a settling of scores disguised as a family conversation. My mother stayed quiet for most of it, which I already knew meant she was hurting, because when my mother goes silent, it's not peace, it's accumulation. Rohan said there was a lack of transparency. Divya said there was a lack of empathy. Akash spent half the call on his phone and occasionally agreed with whoever had spoken last. And I, from my apartment in New Jersey, more than 8,000 miles away, tried to mediate a fight that I myself had unknowingly created, because it was on that call that I understood something that hurt in a way I had no words for. The money I was sending wasn't helping my family. It was feeding tensions that already existed, fueling old rivalries, and creating a dependency that completely distorted the relationship between us. I had built a bomb without realizing it, and for 4 years, I had been watering it, thinking it was a flower. I spent nearly 2 months working up the courage to stop. 2 months of still sending money because I was too afraid to stop. 2 months of waking up at 4 in the morning with my heart racing for no apparent reason, knowing exactly what the reason was. When the decision finally came, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like most of the important decisions in my life. I was sitting on the subway on the way to the hospital, looking at my own reflection in the dark window of the train, and I thought, I cannot keep doing this. Simple as that. I decided I would stop sending money for a while. And I would say that clearly to my family. What happened next went beyond anything I had rehearsed. I called my mother on a Saturday afternoon, careful with my tone because I knew how much the delivery would matter. I explained calmly, said the money was creating conflict, that I needed to pause, that we all needed to rethink this dynamic. I didn't use harsh words. I didn't accuse anyone. She listened to everything. And then she said, "So you're abandoning us." Those 4 words hung in the air between us for a few seconds that felt much longer. She had chosen them with a precision that only someone who truly knows you can, because she knew exactly where it would hurt. I took a deep breath before answering. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm setting a limit because what was happening wasn't good for any of us. She didn't agree, but she didn't hang up either. She went quiet, then changed the subject to the health of a neighbor, as if the previous conversation hadn't happened. I know that mechanism too. Rohan found out the same day. I have no doubt my mother called him right after me. He sent a text, not a call, which already said something. He wrote that I had forgotten where I came from, that if my father were still alive, he would be ashamed. I read that last sentence 3 times. My father died 6 years ago, before I came to the United States. He was a quiet man, few words, who worked with consistency and never asked anything of anyone. I loved my father, and using his memory as a weapon in an argument about money was a cruelty so calculated that for a moment I had no response. I didn't reply that day. My sister Divya was different. She called 2 days later, and what she said was, "Priya, I understand." 2 words, simple, but inside them was something I wasn't getting from anywhere else. Recognition. "You're not wrong," she said, "but brace yourself, because they won't accept this easily." She was right, and I knew it, but hearing that from someone in my own family made a difference I can't quite measure. Akash took almost a week to reach out. When he did, it was a long message saying my success had been built on the backs of everyone who stayed behind, and the least I could do was make sure those who didn't have the same opportunities didn't suffer for it. I wanted to respond, explaining how many nights I had slept badly before exams, how many times I had eaten less to save money, how many overnight shifts I had worked in New Jersey with the flu, with homesickness, with the weight of living in a foreign city with no support network. But I didn't, because I knew it wouldn't matter. When someone decides you owe them something, explanations become arguments, arguments become fights, and fights don't resolve anything. I replied only that I loved him and hoped he would understand with time. He didn't respond. I bought the plane ticket 3 months after stopping the transfers. 18 hours of flying. When the plane began to descend and I saw the first lights of Ahmedabad in the dark of the night, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear, but something hard to name. A recognition. The body remembering where it came from before the mind had time to process. My mother came to pick me up with Divya. Rohan and Akash didn't come. My mother's hug was long and silent. She held me in a way that made me feel for a moment like I was 12 years old again. I cried a little. She cried more. Rohan showed up on the second day. 20 minutes of small talk then. So you're going to keep sending nothing? No preparation, no transition, just the question thrown into the silence like a stone into still water. I tried to explain as calmly as I could what had happened on my side. Not the numbers, the feelings, the exhaustion, the sense of having become a function instead of a person. He listened. I don't know if he heard. There's a huge difference between the two. When I finished, he said, "You think life here is easy? I don't. I never did. Then you understand we need help. I understand you have difficulties. But Rohan, so do I. And what was happening wasn't help anymore. It was becoming an obligation. And obligation without conversation turns into resentment. For everyone." He didn't respond. Said he had to pick up his kids from school. Left. The conversation with Akash surprised me the most. Not because of what he said, but because of what I discovered during it. He told me that over the last 2 years, he had tried to start 2 different businesses. Both had failed. Not from lack of effort, but from a combination of bad luck, dishonest partners, and a difficult local market. He had lost money he had saved for years, and was, in his words, too ashamed to tell the family. "That's why you asked for money without really explaining what it was for." He nodded, looking at my mother's plant pots. "I didn't want you to know I had failed again." I sat with that for a moment. The brother I had judged as complacent had been fighting in silence, carrying a failure too shameful to name. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were the one who made it, telling you my failures felt like, admitting you were different from me. And I never wanted to believe that." The most important conversation of the trip was the last one, the night before I left, with my mother. She turned the TV off on purpose, which meant the subject was serious. She adjusted the hem of her sari with that repetitive gesture I always associated with her thinking about how to start something difficult. "I made mistakes," she said finally. I stayed quiet, let her continue. "I knew the money was creating problems between your siblings, and I kept receiving it because it was easier. Because, while you were sending it, I felt less guilty that you were so far away." That landed somewhere deep. The money was her way of processing guilt about my absence, and mine too. And in the middle of all that, my siblings had become collectors of fragments from a relationship we were all trying to keep alive the wrong way. I held her hand for a while without speaking, then said, "Mom, I didn't leave because of your guilt, and I didn't send money because of mine. But we both need to stop operating from that place." She nodded. There was something in the silence that followed that was different from all the silences before. It was the silence of 2 people who had finally said the true thing. I came back to New Jersey on a Sunday morning, my suitcase slightly heavier with spices my mother had wrapped with that excessive care of someone who knows she won't see her daughter for a while. When the plane began to move on the runway, I felt the tears coming before I even realized they were there. Not sadness about leaving, something more complicated, the kind of crying that happens when the body finally releases what the mind held for too long. I slept for most of the flight. When I woke up, 4 hours from landing, I took out the small notebook I always carry and wrote without structure, without order, just letting the thoughts come out the way they wanted. When I stopped writing, I looked at what was on the page and realized I had, without planning, arrived at some conclusions. The first, I had confused presence with financial contribution for 4 years. The money had become my way of paying guilt in monthly installments. Each transfer was a message I sent to myself as much as to them. "See, I haven't abandoned anyone. I'm still here. I'm still part of this." But presence can't be bought. I knew that rationally. But there's a huge distance between knowing something rationally and being able to act on it. The second, my family weren't villains. None of them were. They were ordinary people who had organized themselves around a structure I had unknowingly created. When you establish a pattern, the people around you adapt to it, not out of malice, out of human nature. I had created the expectation, and then resented the people for having it. The third, and most personal, I had taken less care of myself than I had of everyone else. I had arrived in a foreign country, built a life from scratch, faced loneliness, exhaustion, constant homesickness, and processed all of it alone because my available energy was always being directed outward. There was never much left to just be Priya, the 38-year-old woman who is sometimes tired and afraid and uncertain, and who would need, every now and then, for someone to ask how she was doing and wait for the real answer before changing the subject. In the months that followed, I rebuilt things slowly. I resumed the transfers, but completely differently. My mother and I defined a fixed amount, smaller than before, sent once a month, for her household expenses specifically, not to be distributed among siblings, not to cover anyone else's emergencies, for her. If Rohan or Akash needed something, they would have to talk to me directly, and I would evaluate case by case, not with guilt as the criterion, but with reason, with questions, with real conversations. I started therapy 4 months after coming back, something I had postponed too long with the excuse of not having time, when really it was a lack of willingness to look at certain things directly. In one of the first sessions, my therapist asked me a question that stayed with me. When was the last time you received help from someone without feeling like you had to pay it back twice over? I stayed silent for a long time trying to remember. I couldn't. I had grown up believing somehow that accepting help created a debt, and that the way to never be in debt was to always be the one who helps, to be indispensable, to be needed. The money I sent my family was the most concrete expression of that belief, and the problem hadn't started when I began sending it. It had started much earlier, the day I learned that my worth was tied to what I could offer. Unlearning that takes time. I'm still in the middle of that process. Today, when I look at my bank account, the tightening I feel is different from before. It's no longer the weight of an obligation that grew beyond what I could carry. It's something closer to responsibility. Mine, to myself first, and then to the people I love, within limits that are now discussed, not assumed. I still send money to my mother. I still care deeply about the well-being of each of my siblings. I still carry homesickness in a way that doesn't pass, and probably never will completely, because it's the price I chose to pay for this life I built far from where I started. But I learned that help without limits isn't love. It's fear disguised as generosity. And the limits I had avoided for so long out of fear of losing people didn't push them away. They revealed, instead, which relationships were solid enough to survive honesty. The ones that survived matter more now than they did before, because they're real. If you came this far and recognized yourself in any part of this story, in the guilt, the exhaustion, the feeling that helping became a trap you don't know how to get out of, I want to tell you something I needed to hear much earlier. Setting limits is not abandonment. It's the only path to a relationship that truly lasts. And you, just like me, deserve to be seen as a person before being seen as a solution.